to discuss an issue that's been hotly debated in the media, by the media, ever since the Australian Federal Police conducted a raid on the Canberra home of Sunday Telegraph journalist Annika Smethurst yesterday morning. Now, there's some history here, so let me step you through it. In April last year, the paper I write a weekly column for, the Sunday Telegraph, published a story that the then Turnbull government was considering a proposal from our security officials that the Australian Signals Directorate, the ASD it's called, be allowed to access the communications of Australian citizens here in Australia. Communications such as phone calls, we once used to call that phone tapping, but also to access emails, text messages, anything else that's available in the digital age. At present, police and ASIO can do this, but they must have a warrant signed off by a magistrate or other judicial officer, and they must suspect the Australian in question of a crime. Now, where ASD comes in is that it's the specialist defence body that has all the necessary technical expertise to carry out this surveillance with a warrant, of course, as I said, with a warrant, and you'd never know it was happening to you. Now, what was new and what made Smethurst's story an exclusive is that she reported the Turnbull government discussions about a proposal to do away with the judicial warrant that authorises surveillance access and instead replace it with a process involving a much simpler sign-off by the relevant minister. Now, the security agencies would have argued, in the age of modern communications and the sheer volume of material they need to go through to counter suspected crime and criminal behaviour, that fronting a magistrate for a warrant time and time again is a big drain on their resources. And that's a fair point. But to counter this argument, and it's one I share, it's that judicial oversight of the warrant process is the citizen's last protection against a police state, a world where a politician can use the instruments of the state, the police force and all the military, to grow their power and silence critics. So going back to the Smethurst story in the Telegraph last year, the idea comes up from the Defence Department and the Home Affairs Department to have this new authorisation process. And then at the time, the two relevant ministers, then it was Marise Payne and Peter Dutton, well, they knock it on the head. They don't like it, they don't support it, they don't agree with the bureaucrats that the law should be changed. And the idea gets tossed in the bin. That is until someone down in the public service decides to leak it to Smethurst. And here's where I'm going to differ from the 99.9% of the media who've been out there in the past 24 hours railing against the AFP's raid on Smethurst's home as somehow an assault on freedom of the press. Firstly, I don't come at this from the position of someone who works in the media. I make it my career now, sure, but I'm not a journalist. This is an opinion program and I'm a lawyer by training. But more than that, I'm perhaps the only person you'll find hosting a show on this network or any other discussing this issue of security clearances who's actually held a security clearance. In fact, I've held one of the highest you can have in this country. And these security clearances are not easy to get. They take months and months, and there's intrusion into your personal life that you wouldn't believe. They look into all your past travel overseas, right through your financial affairs. They look at every single address you've ever lived in your entire life. All of it. It's extensive. Then, of course, they throw in 5+ security interviews where you're grilled to ensure that you're the sort of person Australia can trust to read and receive security information of the highest sensitivity. And I make no apology for that. I didn't find it tough. I found it necessary. And it should be like that. Because there's people around the world working for us and our allies who do the very difficult and dangerous work to get us the information contained in these documents and briefings we need to keep Australians safe here and abroad. So when a journalist gets past a secret proposal on anything, it's right and proper, indeed it is the law, that the leak is investigated. This is not about the journalist, it's about the person with the security classification who knows the rules and breaks them. And I've read these reports. I know the sort of sensitive material that they contain. This is a big deal. And if we value the people who work to keep us safe, we should all be concerned that someone somewhere inside the government thought they could make themselves a media hero and leak this proposal. And for what? An idea, a proposal from officials that ministers knocked on the head as something they felt went too far? Those who say the leaking of this so-called secret plan was the act of a whistleblower will wrong again. A whistleblower speaks out against corruption or a covert plan that breaks or would break Australia's rules. There's nothing covert here. If the ministers had accepted the recommendation from officials to change Australia's surveillance process, and they didn't, well, to move from a warrant process to an authorisation via a minister, we'd all have known about it, because such a change would have had to go before the Parliament, where it would have first been considered by the Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence and Security, then debated by every MP in the House and the Senate, and then voted on in the full and transparent glare of the Canberra Press Gallery. And I can tell you here too, if the ministers had not rejected this idea, if they'd said, let's try and legislate it, if they thought it was a good idea, I would have been one of the first people to speak out against it. I don't believe diluting authorisations from a magistrate to a minister is in Australia's best interest or the interests of its citizens. We should all be concerned here, because if security officials, ministers and departments that keep us safe can't have confidential internal discussions to look at new ways to combat the threat of terrorism or online pedophile rings or organised crime drug cartels, then they'll never put up new ideas for fear of leaks. This isn't, to me, a freedom of speech issue. This is an integrity in government issue. And while I'm sorry that Annika Smethurst has been subject to the embarrassment of a police raid, I am not sorry that the AFP deem it necessary to properly investigate this leak, because if they didn't, if they just started to let all the national security leaks slide, then that would be the real story, not this.